our thoughts are actually held in our field. And when we have certain thoughts that are very strong, that get patterned over and over and over again, they actually start to crystallize, or you might say they start to become hard. And when they become hard enough, what they can do is they can actually start to make their way into what we experience as physical symptomology, like things like disease starts to arise in a person. Now, this is a model. To keep in mind, this is a theoretical model because it's obviously in opposition to a traditional Western medical model, but it does give you a kind of a mechanism to understand why something as simple as the placebo effect exists, is that our thoughts or our beliefs affect how our physical body functions. And that's kind of obvious from our direct experience, but it is the opposite of what the paradigm is at the moment.
You are listening to Personal Development Mastery Podcast, providing those with the desire to grow with the simple, consistent actions needed to master personal development and create the life they yearn for. I am your host, 𝗁𝗁𝗺𝗲. A few years ago, I found myself unfulfilled and unmotivated, like I had lost my sense of purpose and my life was merely passing by. Since then, I've been on a continuous journey of personal development that has transformed every aspect of my life. Now, my mission is to inspire you to grow, stand out, and take action towards a purposeful and fulfilling life. In this podcast, I invite myself inside the minds of remarkable entrepreneurs, authors, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, people who share their journey, milestones, and learnings for you to be inspired to grow. In each episode, you will find practical action points that you can implement right now. So make sure you follow the podcast to get them as soon as they are released. In today's show, I am delighted to be joined by 𝗁𝗂. Keith, you have over 13 years of experience in meditation and the healing arts, and you are an adept, facilitator, and teacher of consciousness transformation. You have an unusual extrasensory perception, which you have utilized in an innovative energy healing modality you co-founded called field dynamics. You are passionate about bridging the gap between science and spirituality and empowering others to find their own authenticity, health, and freedom to self-transformation and self-actualization. Keith, welcome to the show. It's such a joy to speak with you today.
Thank you, Agi. I'm very happy to be here.
As I was telling you before, this is one of the topics and the conversations that I have a real keen interest about. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with a little bit of background, Keith. So do you want to take us back and tell us a bit about how did it all start on this path that you're on now?
Sure. One of the things I'm often doing is talking to my former self, meaning so much of what I'm sharing now is to have the kind of conversation that I might have had with myself about 13 years ago. So I'm happy to take it back to that point. Basically, like many people, was going about my life in my late 20s, pretty much trying to do everything I thought I was supposed to do, fulfilling this and that dream and ambition. But what I found was, regardless of how successful I might have been in those initial ambitions, those big dreams, in my case, it was music and music production. And I was living in Brooklyn, New York, running a studio, playing a lot of live music and bands and things. What I found, though, is regardless of kind of life on paper being great, I was suffering a lot inside. Had, maybe the beginnings of feeling a despair or even a depression about life cyclically for some years on and off, and just didn't understand why the pieces weren't fitting. So things got rather bleak at a certain point where I hit the bottom. I really, really found myself unhappy, utterly unhappy. And something sparked in me, something woke up and said, I'm getting this wrong. My equation, the equation for life, whatever it is, I think this plus that equals happiness or contentment, which is probably a word I wasn't too familiar with then. It just wasn't working. So I basically dove headfirst into disengaging with the life as I had been living, and I became a kind of morphed into a kind of a modern type of ascetic, like a person who renounces the world's, kind of basically I meditated a lot all day, pretty much for about the next 3-4 years. I started practicing yoga. I started studying different spiritual texts. In particular, I was interested in Eastern traditions like Buddhism and yoga. And I spent pretty much the next 4 years in particular, pretty much practicing all day, every day, about as much as one can fit into a day, and logging those hours and kind of developing a certain kind of, as personal development mastery of things like meditation. Basic things like meditation, stilling my mind, being with my body, opening up my physical body, being in touch with it, and seeing what was happening in terms of transformation all along the way. So that was the starting point. And then there was a period where what happened is I started to get into the technology of change, meaning going beyond just traditional yogas and breath work and meditation. I found that I started to work with some healers, and those healers were able to put me into states or access things in myself that I wasn't able to do myself. And I said, whoa, these are really interesting to me. So I started studying healing modalities, particularly body work and craniosacral therapy, if you're familiar with that. And I started to dive deep into those things for a number of years as well. So that's basically the shorthand version of what brings me here now, is starting as a seeker, if you will, like the archetype of a seeker. Who am I? What am I? What is reality? What is consciousness? What is contentment? What is suffering? And then started to look into techniques outside of the really old school traditions that enable us to get in touch with our held emotions, enable us to get very deeply into the consciousness of the body and traumas and things that we're holding on to that are kind of hidden, very hard to access, and really went headfirst into that for many, many years. And here I am now talking to you. And I run an energy healing modality, as you mentioned, called field dynamics. And it's kind of the culmination of all of that work, making use of an understanding of the human experience and how to heal that at a holistic level through the technique of energy healing and working with energy, which I'm sure we'll go into more as we keep talking.
Most certainly we will. I want to stay a little bit longer in what you said. You mentioned hitting the rock bottom at some point, or a bottom point, and then going into the journey that you went to. So I wanted to ask, well, two things really. One is, how did you know that this was really the bottom? Because you did have a period, you said cyclical period of despair or depression. What was different that time that made you realize that this is the rock bottom? And I also want to ask, before that time, did you have any spiritual experience or any calling? How from there did you go into, meditating the whole day? Was there some kind of calling for you to pursue this kind of path?
On your second question, I really didn't have a relationship to spirituality at all. I actually was very much a kind of an atheist, almost an aggressive atheist, if you will. I didn't know what to do with spirituality. I had spent my whole childhood growing up with a belief system inherited really through family, particularly my father, that, science is the new thing on the block. Science has all the answers, and we're really just biology and randomness and, Darwinian principles and evolutionary biology. I studied that very extensively, and I still understand that framework very, very well. So I didn't really have time, space, or consideration for the idea of spirituality. I thought religion was a very silly thing, and something that was antiquated and even primitive. But I didn't have an appreciation because I never really looked at it. I certainly didn't understand what the essence of it was whatsoever. So no previous experience with spirituality. I definitely had some important moments in the years previous where I felt a certain joy in certain experiences that I can only in hindsight understand something was waking up in me, maybe a maturation as a person that was starting to ask me to look into different depths in myself in life, but nothing conscious was happening. And hitting the bottom, I knew I hit the bottom because it couldn't have been any worse. I mean, I basically had a short period of experience just where it was like fear was what raw fear was what I was experiencing, and I didn't know how to be more disconnected from myself than that. And so that fear shocked me into finding that depth of, let's say, love or joy or curiosity in me, because I believe in the polarity of our experience. And when you have extreme suffering, you actually find extreme joy or extreme positivity in the face of extreme negativity. You're given an opportunity to feel both when you go to those levels.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your answer. And the reason I was asking is that I find that people can connect with some of the experiences themselves and find something that might be relative to their own experience and their own path that might trigger something. So I find this kind of questions or answers in this case useful for the listener. Not everyone, but some will. Let's talk then about this because it is extremely fascinated. I already mentioned very briefly in the introduction of yourself about this unusual ability that you have to see the human energy field, or the aura as it's called. So do you want to explain a little bit, first of all, how you came to have this or how you discovered to have this ability, if I can call it that? I think it is a precise word to use. How you came to to experience it, what happened for you to get that, and we will go from there.
Okay, it's okay. So strap in for those of you who are listening. It's such a vast subject to start to get into. We could really just talk about what is seeing, what is perception for the remainder of the time, and the process by which people can open up their perception. I could say, this connects to people often, is we understand that we experience physical reality through our senses, and our senses are calibrated by our biology. Our body has a frequency range that we sense the world in. Just like a dog hears frequencies higher than a human, just like a bird sees much more clearly, like a hawk sees with such tremendous acuity, right? So our different physical senses are tuned to our bodies, but we know that there's a much broader frequency range. There's a much broader reality that exists that we're only seeing a small slice of. And this is true not only from physical senses, but even looking at kind of an image of what's the wavelength of light that we even see. We see just a very, very tiny, small subset, right? Mm-hmm. So one way of thinking about opening your perception up is that what you're doing is you're starting to break through the barriers of the presets of the physical body, and you're starting to see beyond those boundaries. Okay. So, and if you can see beyond those boundaries, you can start to interact with all the information there. And that's kind of where this word energy kicks in, which is we have the ability to go from a physical perception and then to start integrating a more energetic perception in, and energy flows, whereas the physical reality seems like it's static. So your physical body looks static. It looks like it's not moving, even though it really is a swarm of neutrons and protons, and it's mostly empty space, right? But we see it as a freeze frame, that it looks static. But once we get energetic, everything's swirling and moving, and it's malleable, and it's plastic, it's liquid-like. And this energy is very, very clear in that we're moving from what we call matter to electromagnetic fields. We're moving from physical matter and the focus on that to literally light. We're starting to actually see domains of light that aren't kind of in this range where we just see them as material. But you might say classically, this is exactly what's being spoken about when you say physical to metaphysical. Metaphysical is not an objectless thing. It doesn't not exist in an objective sense. It's just that it's beyond physical, but it has structure, has a lot of structure. In fact, it has, I dare say, more structure, if you will, more stuff, more information, more data than the material reality does. So my vision is a byproduct of doing all this inner work that I did, right? Now, my objective initially was very, very clear, and that was I want to liberate myself from the suffering that I was experiencing. And I was particularly drawn to Eastern traditions, and particularly Buddhism and the yogas, where it was basically the idea of nirvana, enlightenment, awakening, freeing yourself from essentially base kinds of desires, qualities of greed and lust and envy and hate, and these qualities to just not be a part of your experience anymore, because you've uprooted them out of your being. You've uprooted them out of your psyche. And then it makes room for freedom of choice, to be present, to be at peace, to be loving, to be balanced, all of these things that we all want, whether we say them explicitly or not. Everybody wants to be a loving human being, even if they don't say that out loud. Everybody wants peace. Imagine if somebody said, you could be at peace all the time, every day, in every moment. Right? Who doesn't want that? Now, you might say, well, that's a lot of peace. That's really sustainable, right? But what's the difference between having that available in your experience, having that be the foundational fabric, the background, if it's just 10% of the time versus 30% versus 50 versus 70 versus 90? I mean, imagine being a person who goes through life and has 10% of the time they feel at peace, and then they practice, they change, and then it goes all the way to 90% of the time they have a tremendous peace in the background of their experience. It's like the foundation. That's a big difference in experience, right? Qualitative difference. And I would say maybe there's nothing more valuable than for us to cultivate that in ourselves. I know I'm skirting around this question. So I was really interested in freedom, right? Liberation, traditional ideas of awakening and enlightenment. And I really practiced, really dedicated myself. I said I was a modern ascetic of sorts. I did the thing. I spent a lot of time in India. I put on all the hats, if you will. And I started noticing, there were just phases of depths of change in myself. And one thing that started to happen was, as I started to get more into healing work, where I was really focusing on other people, I started to be able to actually track energy. So I started to work with body work and learn to listen to physical tissue. And if I'm working with somebody, and the modality I really specialized in for a number of years was called 𝗁𝗂𝗺𝗄𝘆𝗀 work, where you put your hands on somebody and you basically, in the one sentence version, you learn to listen to the rhythms of the person's nervous system. Okay. But more deeply, what 𝗁𝗂𝗺𝗺𝗀 work does is it goes from the nervous system and the physical body into the person's psycho-emotional self, psycho-spiritual self, and actually feeling into the feelings, and then even what's happening around the body, the energy field around the body. So there are different approaches to the modality, 𝗁𝗂𝗺𝗺𝗀 work. But what was happening is, whereas initially I would see, I can sense something held, like a tissue dysfunction in the person's right hip, right? And I would attend to that tissue, and then it started to build where I would notice when the emotional component would start to release. Okay, so there would be an emotion associated to the physical body's stress, right? And I started to develop empathic skills. So I'd start to feel emotions very consciously and to know other people's emotions, and start to know that part of the healing process from body to mind, or body to emotion in this case, was that they're connected, and that when you release one, the other one has space to express itself. And that just continued to open up to where I started to actually see that those emotions had structure around the person's body. So I could actually start to see that as the tissue around the right hip in that case would open up, I'd actually start to see distortions in the field around the person's body. And I would be able to track all of this happening, because you start to do it a lot. You start to realize, there's a pattern to this. You just let things happen, and they just, one thing lets go of another thing, lets go of another thing, lets go of another thing. And this just kept expanding. And I did this for a number of years, and I got better and better at sensing these energetic realms. And then I had what is classically in the world of Kundalini, where I had a kind of a very significant opening, a very classical, again, it's a whole other talk. We could talk about it for so long, but basically Kundalini traditions talk a lot about opening up your central channel, certain structures in your energy field, being released or burned off. As they say, the Shakti energy is activated. But basically, overnight, at a certain point in this period of doing healing work with people, overnight, I had this very, very big shift in me that was very dramatic and very ecstatic, if you will, where after that one night, I woke up the next morning and I could see all the chakras. I could feel all the meridian channels, and my perception, this idea of the frequency range of the body, was no longer remotely limited, but rather the kind of the edges of that perceptual fence, if you will, that blocks the perception from going beyond physical. They just came off, and that's what classically is happening in Kundalini literature. Is they're trying to describe the structures that underlie a person's opening into being able to see deeper levels of reality, and specifically the energetic, the electromagnetic, and if I want to get in fancy terminology, seeing into other dimensions is what basically this is about. Just as a shaman would say, you learn to walk different planes of reality. Those planes of reality, those 7 chakras, those 7 dimensions, are the levels of your field, and that's what you start to open up into, and when you start to see electromagnetic fields and the person's aura. So where I'm at today is many, many years on from where I'm leaving off in the story, and I've refined that perception to a very significant degree. It has changed a lot over the years because there are different mechanisms of seeing. There are different ways of seeing the field. And at this point, it's in a different place than it was before. But I do have a very clear vision of the human energy field. I don't have to effort it to happen. I don't have to work my way into a meditative state for it to be there. It's that there is an ability for me, not with eyes open, because it's not physical reality, it's electromagnetic reality. So it's with eyes closed. What I actually am doing is I'm seeing essentially through classically what would be the third eye, or what in the work that I do basically is your 6th chakra. It's an eye made of light, or in your light field. And what you're actually seeing is you're seeing the structuring of the electromagnetic field, which is multidimensional, and which is how your physical body is in the space of an electromagnetic field. And we could talk about cutting edge brain science and how that really, really affirms this in particular ways. And maybe it's worth getting there, but it's hard sometimes. I've said this to you, Agi, at the beginning, because we knew we'd talk about this. Language is a very poor substitute for experience with this stuff, because the direct experience of these things in some ways is ineffable, or is beyond what language can describe. Yet so many of us understandably are interested in this for good reason. So how does that reflect to you? Where can I improve my way of describing this? Because I know there's much more.
There are many questions that came to my mind, and I'm not sure if that is ways for you to improve. But one thing that came to my mind right now when you were saying about the limitations of language in describing this experience. Is there anything else apart from language that could be used? For example, images, or maybe, music, or whatever else could be apart from language that could describe better what is it that you sense. And then I want to ask you more particularly about that, but because you said with your eyes closed, you do see, quote unquote. So if you see something, in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, that implies an image, or moving images, or something that maybe you can draw or paint. I don't know if I'm completely off here or right.
Yeah, no, you're right. And let me differentiate here. This is important. This talk could get very, very esoteric. And I'm really interested in non-esoteric things, to be honest. And I want to strike that balance in how I approach this. My main goal, and the main thing that I do, is I work with individuals and groups of people, and I teach them to practice energy work. That's mostly what I'm doing with my time right now, the majority of it. And that's through the modality, through field dynamics and different training structures we have. And what we're most interested in is utilizing this understanding of how does the energy field work? What are the underlying mechanics of it? Like, why does it move in particular ways? How is it structured? And how is the connection between the field and the body exist? And how can we clear it? How can we release energetic blocks, as is most classically known to the general public? How can we face our held emotions and traumas and limiting beliefs, and how those are reflected or structured in our energy fields? And how can that create freedom in us to live life more fully, with more presence, with more love, with more balance? That's my interest, and that's what I'm focused on working with people. These subtle things around going into the structure of the energy field and multidimensional reality starts to sound very new agey and very kind of ungrounded. And I just want to preface that my interests are very, very practical, very applicable to most people. And furthermore, that science is actually describing multidimensional reality, or our higher reality, if you will. It's really actually more expansive reality or inclusive aspects of what reality is, in cutting edge stuff around brain science, like the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland, in which it's understood that the brain is functioning through higher dimensional geometry, not actually in 3 dimensions of length, width, and height, but the only way you can understand how the neurons in your brain are firing and coordinating action is that it has to work through higher dimensional topography, which is exactly what your energy field is. It's coordinating in the energy field. So your physical body is like linked in to the energy field through these higher dimensions. That's what your brain and nervous system is doing. And that's what the chakras are describing, which is why they are also geometric in origin from the yogis. So there's a whole science and spirituality component to this here. But you asked me a specific question about eyes open, eyes closed, images, this, that, and the other. And what that does is it barks up the tree of the different ways of being able to vision a person's energy field. Okay, right. That's where we left off. As I mentioned, when you move from physical to energetic reality, if you will, or you move from physical to metaphysical, what you're doing is moving from matter or things that are material to things which are immaterial. Okay. Now, immaterial things don't not exist. They're just not matter. Okay. And light, for instance, light is not matter. This is where science hits that big quandary around, is it a particle? Is it a wave? And is it just a probabilistic field in quantum mechanics? Right. So there are stages to developing vision and cleaning up your energy system and ways of being able to see the same phenomena at different levels. So initially, when I told you about that overnight experience where really the barriers, the boundaries, the fences just really came off, that put me for the next couple of years primarily in touch with what's known as the astral plane. Okay. And it would be basically what is just next to physical reality, in that it's a kind of a proto-material, proto-matter. Many people call it simply plasma. So when you look at what matter is, there's 3 states of matter, and then there's a 4th state, and the 4th state is plasma. And plasma is the most common material in the universe. And it seems that this plane, called the astral plane, which is very famous in many traditions. You have people like Robert Monroe, who has the Monroe Institute, teaches people how to consciously move into their astral form and move around. Many people have spontaneous astral projection experiences. Lucid dreaming communities are working with the same phenomena. It's essentially like a component of your energy field that is right adjacent to physical reality, and it's still made of a kind of form of matter. Okay, it's ionized gas, but basically the electrical properties are very unusual in that electrical conductivity approaches infinite speed. So it's a transitional phase, and this you can see with your eyes open. And I was seeing this with my eyes open for a number of years, and this is what many people who say, "Oh, I see auras and I see colors around people," this is what they generally are referring to. They're seeing the astral plane. Okay. And think of the astral plane as a kind of superimposition. It's like superimposed on physical reality, in that it is very related, but it's slightly different. And they're kind of talking to one another all the time. So that's classic aura photography. Classic aura iconography is color fields around people that look like blobs of color. And, people are seeing it that way with eyes open. And I did this for many years. But the thing is that's just the beginning of breaking through the barriers in your energy system. And there are kind of, let's say, more clarified perceptual orientations. And that's when you actually go up higher than the fourth level of the field, which is astral plane, heart-oriented, beyond the physical. And you start going up into the higher centers. For those of you listening to this, people classically know that there are 7 chakras. The chakras are actually what are being referred to as dimensions. And they're kind of defined as being different frequency ranges. And again, brain science is saying, well, your brain is mostly coordinating in 7 dimensions and through higher dimensional geometry. Is exactly what the yogis are talking about, is that your consciousness is coordinating in 7 dimensions or 7 planes of reality, and those are geometric in origin. It's the exact same thing 2,000 years apart. Okay, so what I see now...
Can I because I don't want to go, but I think the conversation is going a little bit more technical than I would like to. So
Yes.
Is it okay? I will bring you right a little bit back. And I think you gave me the answer that I was looking for and more. But there is something very important I'm going to bring us back to. Earlier on, you said about sensing. So let's forget about how to describe it or my previous question. You said about sensing the dysfunction in the body, the emotional component of it when you sense or when you work with a person. So I would like to hear more about this particular emotional component as a component of sickness or illness, and how can this be changed by your work to affect the physical body? And I hope my question makes sense and I didn't complicate it too much.
Okay. So your energy field is a reflection, or contains, you could say, the contents of your experience. And that is basically all of the psycho-emotional stuff that you hold. Your memories, your emotions, your thoughts, your beliefs, all are structured in the energy field. And these are seeable. This is what I'm seeing, by the way, with eyes closed, is I'm seeing the geometric level of the field, which is basically color-coded light in these different layers. Okay, classic, like kind of chakra, multidimensional. And I'm not visualizing anything. I'm not making anything up. I'm seeing it in the same way that you would look at a pool of water spiraling. It's the exact same thing as a physical kind of existence, except it's just electromagnetic in its structure. And when I think, or when somebody else thinks, it actually has a structure that casts itself in these higher dimensions as a kind of a multidimensional geometric shape, in a sense, a very complex shape. A thought has a form. This is classical terminology. Thoughts have forms. Thoughts are things. This is a big deal, right? Thoughts are actually things. Thoughts don't not exist anywhere. Thoughts exist in your energy field. So when we have experiences, when we have traumas, when we have forms of conditioning that create psycho-emotional dysfunction, right, where we hold on to the kind of a belief that says, I'm not good enough, or I don't have confidence, or people who are holding on to lots of anxiety or worry or fear. All of these different kinds of forms of conditioning that come to us throughout our life, particularly in early life, or through the kinds of inheritance that we have through ancestry or other means. These create structures in the field. And those structures in our field, they impose a certain rigidity on the flow in that field. Just like you want blood to flow in your body, and that demarcates health, right? You want really good blood flow in your body, and you'd be in good health in general. You want really good flow in your field. And what blocks do, what held emotion does, is it creates a structure in the energy field that inhibits the energy flow, and then it translates into the connection between the body and the field, in which the body then isn't able to take up its natural regenerative process, is how we generally would describe that. So the connection between the body and the field is that things that are happening in the field happen first, right? We call this a field first model, meaning a thought precedes doing something in physical reality. So if you want to go to the store, you think of going to the store. If you want to make a pizza, you think of making a pizza, and then you can actually physically go to the store. Then you can actually physically, make a pizza, right? So our thoughts are actually held in our field. And when we have certain thoughts that are very strong, that get patterned over and over and over again, they actually start to crystallize, or you might say they start to become hard. And when they become hard enough, what they can do is they can actually start to make their way into what we experience as physical symptomology. Like things like disease starts to arise in a person. Now, this is a model. To keep in mind, this is a theoretical model because it's obviously in opposition to a traditional Western medical model, but it does give you a kind of a mechanism to understand why something as simple as the placebo effect exists, is that our thoughts or our beliefs affect how our physical body functions. And that's kind of obvious from our direct experience, but it is the opposite of what the paradigm is at the moment. So I'm presenting it as a kind of a theoretical model, but I can see directly that thoughts are things. They arise in your field, and these things called held emotions, when resolved, what they do is they give us inner freedom, but they also allow for the physical body to be in a greater state of health and vitality.
Thank you. And let me ask you then directly related to that. So how can energy healing actually heal the physical symptoms? So let me give you an example maybe to clarify my question a little bit more. So let's say there is that emotional component, that thought pattern that has crystallized, as you said, and has created symptoms in the physical body. When we work on this emotion or on this energy level and correct that, and at the moment it's probably way too much to ask how to do that, but let's say that is corrected, how then that heals the actual physical body?
Okay, so the physical body heals itself. It's a principle, right? You don't have to do anything to heal your physical body, right? If you get a paper cut, you don't have to watch your hand or tell your blood cells or your skin cells to patch it up, right? So the body heals itself. So the model here is that psycho-emotional stress inhibits natural self-healing. Psycho-emotional stress inhibits natural self-healing. Mm-hmm. So the psycho-emotional stress, we're saying, is contained as a structure in your field. So, for instance, classically, okay, let's just give an example of somebody who you can understand this better through a person's experience. For instance, the liver as an organ is very well known, for instance, in traditional Chinese medicine as being related to anger. Okay, so when you express the energy of anger, your liver as an organ is very active in general, classically and archetypally. So let's say a person is very angry a lot of the time. Let's just say it's a person who holds a lot of anger. They hold it in, they repress it, or they express it outwardly all the time. But let's just say a person has a lot of anger energy, a lot of anger in their life. Okay. The presumption here is there's going to be a lot of activity in that person's liver, a lot of taxing, draining the liver. That person might develop a certain kind of a liver problem. Okay, let's say they develop a certain kind of a liver problem. Now, they might go to a psychologist and talk to the psychologist about the issues in their life, and they say, I'm a really angry person. I just have all this anger all the time, And I also happen to have issues with my liver. No connection made. Okay, let's just say there's no connection made. But they just know I have a liver disease, let's say, and I'm a really angry person. They work through their anger issues with the psychologist. I'm not even getting into esoteric energy field stuff. It's just like they start to work through and understand where all this anger is coming from, right? And they actually have a lot of release. They have emotional release. They start crying a lot, and they're converting all that angry energy into the sadness that's behind it. And they actually acknowledge the patterns of behavior. They acknowledge the relationships that built up these belief systems and these perceptions, which then had turned into behavior of anger, right? So this person has a huge amount of therapy, emotional release around the therapy, recognizing all of the stuff around the anger, right? At the same time, they notice that their liver disease starts to go away. Their liver starts functioning better. And they're not sure why, but to them, they did therapy on anger, and then their liver started to function better, okay? What's happening there is the structures in the energy field related to anger were going away. Like imagine having tons of inflammation in your energy field around the liver and releasing all that emotion, the held structures, the blocks around the liver, right? Made it so that the physical body isn't inhibited by the obstructions in the energy field. And all of a sudden the physical body can then fix itself. So it can do exactly what it's trying to do all the time. But now the structuring in the energy field, the structuring in the emotions, the structuring in the belief systems and the held memories and all those things, they've been softened, they've been let go of, they've been expressed. And now the physical body goes, great. Energy field's out of the way, mind's out of the way. Now I can go and do what it is I've been trying to do, but I haven't been able to because of all this blockage.
There was something that you said. I'm going to just repeat that because I think it was for me very important as a learning from what you said, was that this psycho-emotional stress inhibits our natural healing. So once this is gone, the body will naturally go into its natural state of healing. That's how I got it. I would like to ask you, Keith, just to start wrapping this intriguing conversation up. I would like to ask you about your work, what it is that you do to help people, and also how can people connect with you and find out more about this truly fascinating work.
Sure. So I run an energy healing modality. I'm co-founder of Field Dynamics, and it's a contemporary energy healing modality. Many people, for instance, will be familiar with Reiki. So Reiki is the most popular form of energy healing on the planet right now by far. What Field Dynamics is it's a contemporary energy healing modality, really, really kind of bringing language and concepts that are contemporary and modern, scientifically aligned, and not really related to any kind of a dogma. It's a universal approach to energy work. So it kind of shows the range of possibilities, the breadth and the depth of what energy healing can be in a very contemporary format. So we offer trainings that are generally, our main training is 6 months long, and we have another advanced training that's another 6 months. So it gives a person a sense of the kind of depth to go into to learn this healing art that is energy work and energy healing, which is a way to unblock your energy field and to find a lot more inner freedom, to experience a lot of self-transformation, and to get in touch with yourself in a profound way. It's very much right now, energy work is kind of I dare say it's at kind of the cutting edge of what's going on. And the reason I say that is because it is very, very effective. It is very powerful, and it accelerates a healing process and self-growth in a very significant way. And it's just now that science is actually, in the last 10 years in particular, scientific language and the cutting edge research being done in biology, neuroscience, physics, the cutting edge research is basically revealing reality very similar to what the yogis and the spiritual traditions were describing thousands of years ago. As we're getting to the really the core elements of looking at reality, as our instruments get better, our scientific instruments, you're going to find that spiritual tradition and scientific language are basically sound almost exactly the same. And that's because you're not going to be able to avoid it if there's really a deep reality, if there's just a real reality, right? A deepest and truest reality. It's not going to matter if you looked at it through the subjective lens of the human experience, through consciousness itself, through your own sense of self and meditating your way into understanding it, or if you look at it with instruments through the objective lens of measuring reality. If there's a kind of an absolute reality behind it all, you're going to wind up describing the same thing regardless. So that's basically what's happening. And energy healing basically makes use of this. Energy healing is an art form that makes use of the underlying principles of how consciousness, thought, beliefs, mind, intention, all work at this electromagnetic level. And then how does it translate into the physical? How are they related? And how do we make changes at the energetic level to then make shifts indirectly at the physical? So this is what I specialize in. And I think that people are going to find in general that in 5 and 10 years from now, energy healing is going to be something that is much more firmly out of this thing called woo-woo, and much more firmly in what's now like something like woo-woo, like hurrah, congratulations, celebration kind of thing. Just the same as meditation's made its way into the mainstream in the last 20 years, yoga has made its way into the mainstream in the last 20 years. Even things like more on the periphery, things like working with crystals, that become very popular in the last 10 years or so. And energy healing is something that keeps gaining more traction because it works. It's very potent. It's very powerful. And it actually is grounded when you come down to it. The understanding what's going on, it's very grounded. That's what field dynamics is founded on, is a modality and a training structure that enables people to explore themselves, explore consciousness through the energy field with the technique of energy healing in ways that generally aren't being explored in the kind of offerings that are out there right now. And it's very scientifically aligned. It's very, very grounded and integrated in its understanding.
Thank you. And where will you direct the listener who wants to find out more about this? What's the best place?
Sure. We have a website called FieldDynamicsHealing.com. So Dynamics Healing, FieldDynamicsHealing.com. And on there, you can see everything we offer, from private sessions with myself or 𝘁𝗻𝗄𝗆. We have a growing practitioner list of people who've become certified with us, and also the trainings that we offer. Our next 𝗁𝗁𝗃100, as it's called, the Energy Healer Training 100 course, the 6-month one I mentioned, starts in early October of 2022.
Keith, thank you very much. This has been a very intriguing conversation, which I was certain beforehand that it would be. There are a couple of quick fire questions just to wrap things up. And the first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
I would say personal development to me means asking what a person is. And if you can figure out what you as a person are fundamentally, then you will develop automatically.
And let's say you could go back in time and meet your 18-year-old self. What's one piece of advice you would give him?
Oh, man. First thing that comes to mind is somehow just be more courageous. At 18, somehow, even I thought I would have been that quality, but I think just somehow meet your fears more head on at that early stage.
Keith, I want to thank you very much for this conversation. I want to wish you all the very best with your healing work and this transformation that you facilitate in others. Any last parting words from you?
In parting, what I would say is the foundation for collective change. If you want to make a difference in the world, my advice, or the orientation that we take with the work we're doing at Field Dynamics, is do the inner work. That the foundation for being the best version of yourself that's possible, and the foundation for changing the world outside of yourself, all starts within. And you can't inhabit a world, you can't create a world, you can't contribute to a world that you yourself don't know directly within yourself. So good old inner work, inner peace, self-love, and love, of course, for all. But finding the inner balance and contentment is really the foundation for everything else. And it's a pretty good quest, because then every moment of your life can be improved. It's not just occasionally. If you can find sustainable peace, love, and joy within yourself, then every moment of your life increases in its quality, and that's a pretty good investment.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you got great value from today's episode. And if you'd be so kind, please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcasts review, sharing how personal development mastery has made a difference to you today. And I will read the review in the podcast. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in,